Okay, the next one is Bitcoins. What is the future of Bitcoins? Would you go big with Bitcoins and why?
Let me begin to just clarify the question. Are you talking about Bitcoin specifically or cryptocurrencies?
Well,
We know Bitcoin is the flagship of cryptocurrencies. But perhaps before I go into Bitcoin, let me just talk about cryptocurrencies and why that has become
popular.
popular. And you have, I believe that something like 32,000 merchants on a daily basis joining the cryptocurrency community, basically the Bitcoin community. Now, it's very difficult at this point in time to determine exactly where the value of Bitcoin is, because it's a perceived store of value, and certainly with over 350,000 merchants worldwide and growing at 10% per month, there is a perception amongst on the commercial side that Bitcoin is a store of value. There's other things that indicates to its value, and let's make sure that we understand this, that the real value behind any cryptocurrency is the technology, the blockchain technology. The biggest 5 banks in the US have just established a $1 billion fund to investigate the blockchain technology to see how that can be utilized by the banks. And purely from the point of view that remitting Bitcoins are an instantaneous transaction. You know that if you press the button here to send the Bitcoins, within something like 30 seconds to a minute, it is in the recipient's possession, in his wallet. Whereas if I have to effect a payment from here to China through the Fiat currency system, it will get off my account, and 5 days later it will end up in the recipient's account. And I have a few things to say about the banksters about that. I don't believe that investigation into the blockchain technology is necessarily to speed up the process. The banksters gain from that, because that money doesn't disappear into thin air for 5 days. It remains on somebody's balance sheet before it's transferred into the other bank's balance sheet. And that allows them, just in South Africa, something like 68 billion rand a day that the banks have, which belongs to nobody. It's no longer in your account, and it's not yet hit my account. So I don't believe that the banks is going to very quickly relinquish that benefit. But it's interesting to note that Goldman Sachs in 2015 registered a patent on a cryptocurrency called Settle Coin. Now, if one of your biggest bankster organizations register patent on a cryptocurrency, and they now putting a fund together of $1 billion with their fellow bankers to investigate the blockchain technology behind cryptocurrencies, it becomes a space that everyone has got to carefully watch. Why? Well, the fact and the biggest benefit of cryptocurrencies, well, there's many benefits, and let me get away from cryptocurrency and get to Bitcoin, because it is the flagship, is that, first of all, it's outside of any control. It's controlled by the Bitcoin community themselves. No government control, no banking control, no regulations. It is subject to control by the users themselves. And isn't that what money is all about and should be all about? The second thing is that Bitcoin has a limited quantity that can come into existence. I think we have just reached the 15 million Bitcoins in circulation, and there is a maximum of 20,999,999 Bitcoins that can ever come into existence. There can never be more than that. And Economics 101, supply and demand, the less there is of something, the higher the price of that be. So everything points out that Bitcoin should be increasing in value as we reach the 20,999,000 mark. That said, however, is that Bitcoin is still in its development phase. We cannot argue that away. It came into existence, the first Bitcoins was issued in 2009, so it has just now been 6 years in circulation. And it had a lot of turmoil on the way up here. We know that Bitcoin at one point in time reached $1,000 a Bitcoin. And it dropped way back down to below $200 a Bitcoin and steadily been increasing. We see extreme volatility in the marketplace. And everybody's trying to get his head around why there is volatility in the market. I must say that for the last 6 weeks, the price has been steadily trading within a fixed band, which gives a lot of confidence in that, especially when there has been huge turmoil on a geopolitical front. One of the problems that you have with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is that you cannot escape the abuse of this currency by criminal elements, and that is a major concern. But I do believe that as the community, the cohesion within the cryptocurrency community becomes stronger, that internal self-regulation on that score will become easier and will become implemented by the Bitcoin community. So, yeah, Bitcoin, as far as I'm concerned, has a very bright future. It's an alternative to fiat currency, and the biggest problem with fiat currency is the way it's created. Let's be quite honest, that money is the biggest Ponzi scheme perpetrated by governments and central banks throughout the world. It is a Ponzi scheme and it's going to collapse. And I'll explain that in a short while when I explain to you where money comes from. Because people walk around with lots of notes in their wallets. And if you ask them where they come from, they say, oh, it comes from the Reserve Bank or the Mint or somewhere. Well, that's not what I mean where it comes from. How does it come that money gets... How does it... the flash has gone off, sorry. Is it still fine? Okay. How does it come that money come into existence? But let me just finish on the Bitcoin score. One thing that we must bear in mind, different from gold, Bitcoin has not yet proven itself under adverse economic conditions such as a recession and a depression. It came into existence at the end of the 2008 financial collapse and has performed extremely well since then. But to be absolutely 100% positive to say that Bitcoin will survive and will come through a recession with flying colors, that remains to be seen. Everything points in that direction. But I will be very careful to tell people that Bitcoin will be your salvation in economic recession.
Yeah, well, I would say like this year there was already when we were in Russia, September, they had said we're in a recession. We haven't just formalized or told everybody yet. And since then the Bitcoin has gone through some very nice highs, so that gives me hope that it is actually...
I hear what you say, but Russia is perhaps the odd one out. The Russian psychic of the population and the way that Russian or Russia is governed is totally different. One has to understand that Russia has got huge resources coming in from its oil and gas sales, but that doesn't get distributed into Russia itself. That's kept by the government for its adventures like the one in Syria now and the one in Ukraine and manipulating their influence spheres in the world, or perceived influence spheres. What is perhaps more significant is that when the turmoil in China hit in August, and the Chinese government eventually had to introduce capital controls in October, the general flight by Chinese investors was to Bitcoin. And we saw a spike in the price of Bitcoin up to $500, just over $500, before it returned to the levels of around 400, 430, where it is now. So, yeah, there are all those indications that Bitcoin may very well become the currency of choice in a situation of an economic depression. We know that the European finance ministers in October made a decision to acknowledge Bitcoin as a currency, which has given Bitcoin a huge push forward, and is also perhaps one of the reasons why there's a huge spike in the number of merchants that now begin to join the Bitcoin community and accept payment of Bitcoin. If you go into the websites of Bitcoin, there's nothing that you cannot buy with Bitcoin today. From luxury properties all over the world to...
You can book your aeroplane tickets.
You can pay for a restaurant. You can actually put in fuel with that. So the acceptability of Bitcoin is certainly unquestionable currently, and I predict that it will expand significantly as time goes on throughout the year. Now, let me get to the point where I say that fiat currency, money as we know it, that 100 Rand note that you got in your wallet, is a Ponzi scheme par no comparison. Okay. How is money created? Well, first of all, the Reserve Bank owns the mint in terms of the 1989 Reserve Bank Act. Our government budgets for a deficit was supposed to be 5%. It's going to run somewhere around 80 billion Rand this year. So the government has to go to the Reserve Bank and say, I need 80 billion Rand this year to pay for all the things that I want to do. The Reserve Bank then instructs the mint to print 80 billion Rand notes, which it will give to the government in exchange for a bond that the government print, or a series of bonds that the government print and give to the Reserve Bank. That raises the first question. If the government can print a promissory note, a bond, why can't it print money? Why does it have to go to the Reserve Bank to get the Reserve Bank to print money? Well, that's part of the system, you understand. Now the government, the Reserve Bank, on behalf of the government, will auction those bonds off to investors at the rate. The problem is that in the current situation in South Africa, where our status, our credit status is being degraded every time, and we will, I say that with full confidence, be graded as junk status in March, when Standard & Poor does its next grading. We will become junk status. The interest that the government pays on that 80 billion that it's borrowed, and all the money that it's borrowed in the past, will become exorbitant. I estimate that South African bonds will probably go up to 10.5% interest. And you can imagine that the Reserve Bank will be hard-pressed to keep internal repo rate at its current rate when the government's got to pay 10% on its debt. So the indications are already there that interest rates is going to increase seriously. The problem with that is that the Reserve Bank has only printed $80 billion for the government. What about the interest that the government's got to pay every quarter henceforward? So, hat in hand, the government's got to go back to the Reserve Bank and says, now I've got to pay the interest, print me more money. And so the Reserve Bank creates printing because it's an eternal debt cycle. The government's been caught up in this debt cycle and they can't move. But you and I get caught up in that same cycle as well, because the second way money is created is through the so-called reserve system that is provided for in the Reserve Bank Act, whereby the Reserve Bank determines the amount of reserve money that the banks must hold with the Reserve Bank as security in case of liquidity problems. And that's 10% at this point in time. So what happens? Every 100 rand that you deposit with the bank has got to pay 10 rand of that over to the Reserve Bank. So the bank's only got 90 rand. Now if I go to your bank and I borrow and I say I need 90 rand for petrol to put into my car, the bank says, sure, I've got 90 rand here, I'll borrow it to you. There's the 90 rand. So I go and put petrol into my car, and the garage takes the 90 rand to its bank. Its bank takes 9 rand, deposited with the Reserve Bank, and then Nelda goes to that bank and says, I need 81 rand to buy makeup. And the bank says, sure, I've got 81 rand. I will give you 81 rand. So Nelda goes and she goes to Edgar's and buy her makeup. Edgar's go to their bank and they deposit the 81 rand. Now Nikki, my wife, goes to that bank and says, I need 81 rand. Oh, 8 rand 10 cent. That bank has deposited with the Reserve Bank. So now it's got 72 rand 90 cents. Nikki goes to her bank and says, I want to borrow 72 rand 90 cents because I need to take my dog to the vet. So she takes the 72 rand 90, go and pay the vet, and the vet goes to its bank, and the same process just keeps on repeating itself. How much money was there in the beginning, Real?
Yeah, 100.
100 rand. How much money is there now? Yeah. In the end, when the banks are finished with it, there's 1,000 rand. Created out of thin air. Yeah. Can you understand why fiat currency will have no value unless if the Reserve Bank Act, which determines that is money in South Africa, is removed? You will be able to do absolutely nothing with that paper. It's a Ponzi scheme, and it has to collapse at some point in time. And that point is very near, worldwide, because it's not just the South African, it's all banks throughout the world that works on this way. All central banks throughout the world operates on exactly the same basis. Our Reserve Bank Act was simply copied from the US Reserve Bank Act. So the US and the UK and Europe and China and Japan, they all work on the same basis. Money is going to collapse. There's just simply too much have been created.